Imagine witnessing a man being boiled alive in public. That horrifying scene really played out in 1532 in the shadow of London's Smithfield by order of King Henry VIII. In fact, Henry had just decreed that anyone found guilty of poisoning would be punished by boiling, a draconian law passed in 1531. The first person sent to that bubbling cauldron was Richard Roose, a common kitchen cook. The crime? Poisoning a simple porridge and killing 2 people. But the punishment was beyond grim. Boiled alive for all to see at Smithfield. Smithfield Common was a familiar place for public spectacles. In medieval times, it hosted tournaments and fairs and, of course, executions. Who was this king who would order such a thing? Henry VIII's portrait masks the paranoia that drove him to this cruelty. By 1531, Henry was obsessed with the idea of poison. He even addressed Parliament about it. When Roose's case arrived, Henry rushed through a new law retroactively punishing poisoners with boiling. Henry's law made poisoning high treason. This was not centuries ago. It was 1531 in a kingdom in turmoil over the king's divorce and religious upheaval. The year was 1531. In February, Richard Roose, sometimes called Cook or Rose, was arrested in Lambeth Marsh, just south of the Thames. He was a cook, or at least a kitchen servant, in the household of John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester. On February 18th, Rose served a large porridge spiced with a mysterious white powder to the bishop's guests and to local poor seeking charity. Before long, people fell violently ill. Among them were Burnet Curwen, a gentleman in Fisher's household, and a beggar woman named Alice Trippitt. Both ate the poisoned pottage and died. Bishop Fisher, for unknown reasons, did not eat that meal. Perhaps he fasted or stepped out, so he survived. Rose insisted it was all a terrible joke gone wrong. He claimed a stranger gave him the powder and said it would only make people incapacitated, not killed. But 2 were dead, and dozens more sickened. Londoners were terrified. Poisoning was as feared as it was little understood. That very day, Rose was arrested, and under torture he partially confessed to adding poison to the broth. Now the kingdom demanded answers. Why target Fisher's household? Rumors swirled that this was no random prank. Fisher had many enemies. Bishop John Fisher was a staunch defender of Queen Catherine of Aragon and a fierce critic of Henry's plan to marry Anne Boleyn. Contemporary gossip even suggested that Anne Boleyn herself or her powerful father Thomas Boleyn might have bribed the cook to poison Fisher's dinner. In fact, months earlier, someone had even fired a cannon at Fisher's residence from the direction of the Boleyn family home. No one was hurt, but the roof was damaged. None of this could be proven, but it set a tense backdrop. Fisher was vulnerable and Henry was enraged. No wonder the king moved swiftly to punish anyone connected to the crime. Henry VIII's reaction was extreme. He already feared assassination by poison, and now he turned that fear into law. In a special act of Parliament, the Act for Poisoning, passed in 1531, Henry declared that any murder committed by poison was high treason, punishable by being boiled alive. The law even named Richard Roose in its preamble, recounting that one Richard Roose, a cook, by putting poison in some food, killed a man and woman. Because Henry had not yet run its course of cruelty, the act also stated that he shall be therefore boiled to death without benefit of clergy. In short, poisoners had no right to religious sanctuary or easy death. They would be slowly cooked over fire for all to see. This savage punishment was almost unheard of in England. It took effect in the 22nd year of Henry's reign, 1531, and was written to crush any thought of poisoning a monarch or his high officials. England had known brutal executions before, hanging, drawing, and quartering for traitors, burning for heretics. But boiling was rare. It was intended to be a spectacle and a warning. The king would not tolerate poison. And so, under this new law, Richard Roose was charged with high treason by pouring poison into the bishop's pottage. No jury trial would slow things down. Parliament attainted Rose and proclaimed his sentence. What happened next would become chillingly famous. By royal order, the condemned cook was taken from the Tower of London to Smithfield Market to die. We have a very graphic account from a contemporary chronicler. As Rose was immersed in a cauldron of boiling liquid, he roared mighty loud, and divers women who were big with child did feel sick at the sight, and were carried away half dead, and other men and women did not seem frightened by the boiling alive, but would prefer to see the headsman at his work. Imagine the scene, screams filling the air, a huge black pot bubbling with blood and flesh. It was a horror show intended to terrify onlookers. Long before the Tudor court, England had a French queen, and a very different kind of tragedy. In 1396, a 6-year-old French princess, Isabella of Valois, was married off to King Richard II of England to make peace between the nations. She grew up in England as Queen Isabel, even learning English, though she never saw the brutality of Tudor rule. Isabella's story was one of diplomacy. Her royal marriage was meant to bind two countries together. The politics of Henry's time still echoed those old ties. Isabella's sister Catherine of Valois later married Henry VIII of England, bearing the infant Henry VI and briefly uniting England and France. By Henry VIII's era, those dynastic links had faded into history, but the influence remained. Henry's own queen was Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess. But wars and marriage alliances with France and the Empire consumed his reign. In a way, the horrors of Richard's day, the poisoning law and its bloody outcome, stood in stark contrast to the gilded life of the child queen. Yet both stories show how the fate of nations can hinge on a single sovereign's will. Henry's act to boil poisoners to death was a grotesque legacy of royal power, a power once used to wed children for peace. The execution of Richard Roose sent shockwaves. News of a man boiled alive in public was gruesome enough to fuel rumors and fear. But political lives carried on. Bishop Fisher fled London for safety, and within a few years he too would fall victim to the king. He was executed in 1535 for opposing Henry's supremacy. Henry secured his divorce and married Anne Boleyn, then Jane Seymour, continuing the Tudor line. The Act of 1531 stayed on the books for only 15 years. It was repealed under Henry's son Edward VI in 1547, perhaps as too harsh a penalty. Yet the memory of Rose's death endured. Chroniclers and common people alike never forgot seeing a man burned alive in a cauldron. Centuries later, lawyers still cited this case when discussing the power of Parliament and treason. Historians note that Rose's attainder was an early example of Henry using Parliament to do politically risky executions, a precursor to how he'd later use acts of Parliament to execute nobles and even queens. In the end, Rose's tale is a chilling footnote in the age of Henry VIII, a brutal reminder of a king's paranoia and cruelty, and of how far a monarch could go to protect himself. The story of Richard Roose teaches us about the extremes of Tudor justice. It began with a pot of poisoned porridge and ended in boiling water under the firm command of England's most infamous king. By examining this dark episode, we see Henry VIII not just as a romantic or tyrant, but as a ruler who inspired laws born of fear. We also glimpse the broader stage of European politics, from child queens like Isabella of Valois to dynastic battles that framed Henry's decisions. Thank you for listening to this gruesome true story. If you found this chilling tale of Tudor history fascinating, please like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts or your best scream, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.